Hi, this video is the part 2 of OpenAPI backend proxy demonstration. It is basically a video walkthrough of the tutorial in the OpenAPI in the light-proxy OpenAPI backend. So in the first part 1, we've already started 3 different instances of backend OpenAPI servers. Now we're gonna configure the light proxy to start it so that we can access the proxy port number 8080 in order to round robin between 3 different backend instances. So first, we need to take a look at the externalized configuration files for the light proxy. In the light proxy itself, we don't have any default configuration files packaged into the delivery, because this is required by most of our enterprise users. They are afraid if there are any default configuration file inside, they might forget about to overwrite that, so that we leave security concerns on the table. That's why we remove all the default configuration files, so that the users have to create externalized configuration folder and put necessary config files to allow the server to start. So let's take a look at the externalized config folder for this tutorial. As normal, we are putting this into netguarantee light config test light proxy OpenAPI proxy folder. This can be accessed from this light config test repository on GitHub netguarantee organization. You can see we only have that many config files for the proxy. This is the minimum. Like you can add more later on if you want to enable security, if you want to enable like tracing, you want to enable metrics, logging, whatever. Like that can be added on. But this is not part of this tutorial. This tutorial is just trying to give you a brief understanding how the proxy is supposed to be working. All detailed configuration regarding the proxy, you can later on take a look at the proxy documentation. So the first config file, of course, is proxy.yaml. This is a specific for the proxy server. So you can see we have HTTP2 enabled, HTTPS enabled because our backend service is built on top of the Light4j, and the default is HTTP2 and HTTPS enabled. But if you are using others platform or languages to build your backend service, you need to carefully select if you are using HTTP2 or using HTTPS. Majority of the time we are using HTTPS, but HTTP2 is seldom supported by most server platforms. And you can see target URL. We have HTTPS localhost 8081, 8082, 8083. 3 different target servers configured here. Connection per thread 20. Max request times 1 second. This is a millisecond. Rewrite host headers true. Reuse X forwarded false. And max connection per retry is 3. So if it fails, we retry 3 times to see if the request can pass through. Let's close this one. And you can see another important file is the handler.yaml. Handler.yaml is used to configure the middleware chain for the Light4j platform. You can see we have that many handlers configured into this proxy server, and this is the default chain. We have exception, traceability, correlation, header, proxy, specification, security, as well as validator. So those are the default middleware handlers wired into this default chain. And you can see we define 2 different paths. for the application, the backend application, using /v1 get data is a get request using this default chain. /v1 post data is a post method using default chain. The rest health check and server info, that's the standard. So you can see the health check, we are using the backend service ID as part of the backend check. If we register the proxy server to the global console registration, this proxy basically is represent the backend services. So that's why we're using the backend service ID as the service ID. Yeah, another file you need to pay attention to is OpenApi.yaml. This is copied from the backend service. Basically, it's coming from the code generation from model config folder. So this file will be used to verify the security as well as validate the request response on the fly. Another file is copied over from light-proxy client module is client.yaml, as well as the corresponding client.truststore, which contains the certificate to access the server. This is necessary, we are using this self-signed certificate to access the backend services built on light-proxy. And another file we have is server.yaml and the server key store. This contains the private key. If you look at the server.yaml, you can see the default. We have HTTP2 enabled, and we have this com networking backend 100 is the service ID. Those are the changes we've done to make sure this proxy servers represent the backend service. And another thing we changed is HTTPS port. It's 8080. That's pretty much all we have. Now let's try to start the server. Go to the terminal, and this is the source code, and you can see we are using the master branch. Yeah, this application of project has already built, so you can see we have a target directory. So we want to start right away. Otherwise, you need to have Maven clean install to build it. So we don't need to rebuild it. Take a while to download all the snapshot dependencies. You can see this is the command line we start the proxy server. We are using -d light-proxy config dir. When you are using this command line, you might need to change this part so that it's pointing to your local absolute directory. You can see we're using light config test, light proxy, OpenApi proxy. That folder we just showed you is configuration folder. And we start light-proxy.jar. Okay, let's start it. Now we have the proxy server started. So the next step, we're going to test it out to see if the proxy server is working. Okay, first let's send a GET request to the proxy. The port is 8080. You can see it works. It basically pick up random instance 8082 to get the response. You can see 8082 here. Now send another request. You can see, oh, we got the 8083. Let's send another request, 8081. So you can see the round robin is working. Another request should be 8082. Now let's send a post request. You can see we got a response as well, the post request. And what's the HTTPS port number? 8083. Yeah. So basically, this is the last GET request. The next one go to 8083. As I told you, like we have a OpenAPI YAML file embedded into the proxy. So if you send a wrong request, for example, this one, you can see we are not using key and value is the name. We're using key 1 and value 1. And let's see what happens. Okay, we got validator schema, the error message. $.key is missing, but it's required. So you can see we got the request rejected by the proxy because the proxy is using the backend OpenAPI.yaml to validate the request on the proxy level. So if it's not a valid request, it won't even send to the backend. It just give you the error response immediately. So the backend won't even be accessed. So this is basically conclude the part 2 of the tutorial. A lot of developers ask, okay, if I'm trying to use your proxy server and I have some backend works, but once the proxy is up running and it works for some the endpoint, it doesn't work for other endpoint, or sometimes it's not working at all. Yeah, I can say like in most cases this is due to the configuration. And I'll give you one example how you can debug the proxy with your backend server at the same time. So you can see now we have proxy server started. We have 3 instances of the backend server started. Let's shut down the first instance of backend server 8081. And let's shut down the proxy. And we start both proxy and 8081 instance from the IDE. I'm using IntelliJ IDEA Community Edition. And you can see we have backend here, proxy backend. And if you go to the added configuration for this server, you can see we are using com networking server.server, and the VM option /d light-4g config dir equal to /home Steve networking light config test light example 4g REST OpenAPI proxy backend 8081. So this is exactly the same like you start from the command line. So let's close this and we start in debug session. Debug server. You can see we got a server started listening to 8081. And let's go to another IDEA window. So in this window, we have light-proxy, networking light-proxy loaded. And you can see the configuration, com networking server.server. And we have -d light-4g config dir equal to home Steve networking light config test light proxy OpenAPI proxy. So this is basically like a corresponding to the command line to start proxy as well. Let's close it and let's debug server. You can see we have the proxy server started listening to 8080. Now, if you go back to the command line, we put a curl command, or let's get first 8081. This time it's coming from A0, A2, A0, A3, A0, A1. So you can see A0, A1, like that instance in the IDE respond the request, right? And you can see the proxy in the IDE works. If it doesn't work, give you one example, it doesn't work, you can debug in this window. For example, if let's say the validation doesn't work, you can just go here. This is dependency, external library. Any external library, you can just set breakpoint and see how this works. Give you one example. For example, the OpenAPI parser is now working to parse the OpenAPI YAML. You can basically start it and put an endpoint somewhere, like see how this file is not loaded correctly, whatever. You can just put anywhere the endpoint, and you can hit the server with the command line URL request. Not necessarily you debug into the code in the proxy, because proxy is using a lot of middleware handlers. The majority of the time, if it doesn't work, it's a middleware handler doesn't work. So you can set an endpoint anywhere you want. You can also set an endpoint on the server side, the backend service. Let's see, the backend service. Let's say you are trying to hit a request like a get data get handler. You can set an endpoint here and see how this response is called. But remember, this instance within the IDE is listening to 8081. So only you need to send multiple requests from the command line through proxy in order to hit this instance, because chances are the other two instances receive the request and response. So that's it. This basically concludes part 2 of the tutorial for the OpenAPI backend proxy configuration. In part 3, I'm going to package the proxy, basically using the Docker image to start a proxy with externalized configuration, so that show you how to use Docker. And in most cases, people are using Docker published in the Docker Hub for the proxy server. Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.